Alrighty guys, we are back with some Warhammer 40k lore. This time, what the fuck is Tyranids? Now, this subject's actually very fascinating to me, and I'm actually really passionate about the Tyranids. Not because I'm a Tyranid player, I actually play the Orcs. But it's only because Tyranids have gone through a lot of changes, much like the Necrons. They're much the same in very different aspects. But I mostly love the Tyranids because it's the only faction where we actually look at different galaxies. The only other one would be the King of the Necrons, which I'm going to cover him in another lore video. But the Tyranids are the only ones we've seen other galactic species. Not other planets, not other aliens, no, other galaxies we've seen life. So, without further ado, what the fuck are the Tyranids? You see, way back in the day, we're talking like 3rd edition, 4th edition Warhammer 40k, Tyranids were essentially aliens. They were just regular, average aliens. They were kind of like Tau in a sense, but where they were just a bunch of alien species living together on hive ships and just moseying around planet to planet, invading, killing humans, gathering more aliens. And 50% of all Tyranid forces would be consisting of Zotes, and Zotes were a different species that was subjugated by the Tyranids. This was the old lore. They are not like that anymore. They are now a hive mind that is still a hive fleet base. They're still based in space. They don't actually control territory. But now they're a hive mind. They don't mix with other species. They are 100% their own thing. They may have different little monsters in their army, but those monsters are just genetically modified Tyranids. This is the whole point of the Tyranid armies, that they're all about genetic modification. Zero sciences of the mechanical matter exist within the Tyranid forces. It is only biological. In fact, when it comes to a Tyranid and his weapons and armor, you may say, well, you can switch a Tyranid's weapon and armor for each 700. How is that not mechanical technology? Well, what it is the Tyranids actually grow their armor. They actually grow their weapons. And it gets to a point where it's very difficult what to say is part of the Tyranid's body versus this is actually a different Tyranid organism that's actually his weapon. It's very difficult for scholars and for researchers to understand what part of the Tyranid's body is actually the Tyranid itself versus what part of its weapons, its armor, its chest piece, its whips. Yeah. So that's the way the Tyranids work. It's very fascinating stuff. So already we have established that the Tyranids are a force of evolution. They have focused hard on progressing whatever genetic modifications they can pull on their own DNA. And when they attack worlds and attack other alien species, they have been mentioned of dissolving enemy DNA, studying it, and incorporating it in their forces. We see this a few times actually in Warhammer 40k where new units are coming out for the Tyranids, but these new units are exclusively good for special things, like some units are good for fighting Eldar. Some units are really good for fighting the Space Marines. So you have to be very careful when you say certain things about Tyranids. Like, they do devour biomass. That's absolutely sure. Like, that's how they thrive. They go around, they just kill a shit ton of people and scoop up all their blood, their biomass, everything. But they're also scooping up DNA, and they're not just digesting it, they're also studying it. Now, there is no way that we would understand it, like scientists or researchers in the Tyranid army. No, that doesn't exist. You see, Tyranids are a hive mind. They are just a singular entity that, sure, each hive fleet has its own traits, its own personalities, so to say. But on an individual basis, when you look closer and closer at the Tyranids, you realize that there really is no individual mindset. There are no researchers, no scientists. So instead, it's just one big mega brain that is just doing all this work, studying the DNA, studying these ways of manipulating the DNA, studying the ways it can change its own coding, its own works. But this mega brain, this hive mind, is somewhat localized. As we will see is that there will be many times, both in the lore, in video games, in the books, and even in the codex, where some hive fleets will have genetic material that other hive fleets do not have. And we'll see it where until those two hive meats come into contact to exchange the information. If you actually destroy one hive fleet, boom, you get rid of all that DNA that it was holding. This is actually something they do a bit in the one video game, Space Hulk, where Tyranids somehow managed to synthesize Dark Angel gene seed, which would have made abominations that are very, very strong against Space Marines. Well, by destroying the Space Hulk and getting rid of the Tyranids there, they pretty much prevented that. So that's the way the whole hive mind works, is that it is one singular entity that has a greater plan, but that greater plan does get diverted into subplots, sub-stories consisting of its hive fleets. Each hive fleet has its own idea, its own story that it goes for. And they are not, quote-unquote, individuals in the way we would understand it. It would be much like something that I would say the Zerg in StarCraft 2, where it would probably be tinier brains or tinier sections of your brain governing these tiny things. It's a very complicated issue, and that's why I'm going to have to cover the Tyranid hive mind in a separate video. But all you have to know for now, for an introduction to you who do not know what Tyranids are, is that Tyranids are essentially hunter-gatherers extremely later in the future. You see, when it comes to early hunter-gatherers for human history, with our own real-life history, as a hunter-gatherer, your goal is to just simply survive. You have to go around, kill whatever animals are nearby, eat them, move on. Eat them, move on. Same with any apples you find, any fruits that are edible, anything. And you just keep going on and on your way. Now, the trail behind you may be barren, but over time, it will replenish. And then you can make a circle around and eat it again, and then keep on going on this loop of survival. So now with Tyranids, it's essentially that is the plan. This is the end game goal for the Tyranids. Not to just wipe out all life in the galaxy, but to leave it as a lifeless husk and move on to another galaxy, and then to another galaxy, and just keep the ball rolling, and then maybe come back around to the galaxy that you first pillaged a million years ago, because now new life exists, new DNA for you to conquer, new foods for you to eat. This is the Tyranid, essentially, is that they're just constant moving, constant hunting, constant gathering, constantly moving. And this is something I actually like a lot about the lore, is that Tyranids do not hold ground. They do not simply create bases. They do not create empires. So when it comes to fighting a force like this, who's just simply hunting, gathering, it becomes extremely difficult, especially since you can't just recolonize the worlds that the Tyranids have just took over. Because the Tyranids will actually suck the atmosphere out. They will drain the oceans. They will drain any soil that is on the planet, converting into like a giant slushy, and then sucking it up into their ships. This has rendered any world that they have attacked and conquered, it renders all worlds as dead worlds. There is not even a bacteria left standing on the worlds that they have conquered. So this actually presents some interesting issues, because there are many species and factions in Warhammer 40k that do similar work. The Necrons are one, and there has been some new theories lately that maybe Necrons are related to Tyranids somehow, which I kind of don't like. But the Necrons also do the same. They instill pylons and such that use technology to deaden worlds. Then there's Chaos, who doesn't actually exist technically. They just simply turn a world into a magical fairyland, and magical fairyland doesn't have any sustenance for Tyranids to devour. So it actually leads to some very interesting issues for the Tyranids when it comes to this galaxy. But do not fret, Tyranids. You see, when you have a massive swarm of countless billions of soldiers, it really doesn't matter if you come across a foe that you can't gain sustenance from, because the Tyranid motto is to just keep moving. So this is the Tyranid strategy. Let's say, for instance, Tyranids run across a shit ton of solar systems that are just Necron controlled. What would the Tyranids do? This would be a long fight. They're not going to get anything out of it. They're actually going to lose biomass if they decide to fight it. So what do? They simply leave. They leave, and maybe they'll come back a million years later and see if those robots still exist, or if the robots just simply decayed and broke down and now an actual organic civilization exists on top of them. This is the way the Tyranids work. So when the Tyranids see things like chaos or Necrons, pretty much anything that's too powerful or too risky for the Tyranids to fight, they just ignore it and then they fight everything else around it. This is why the Tyranids seem to go for the Tau. This is why the Tyranids seem to go for the Imperium of Man. This is why the Tyranids somewhat go for the Eldar. They seem to kind of ignore them sometimes because, again, the Eldar are constantly moving, just like the Tyranids, so it's very hard for them to actually get them down. But when they do, oh boy, it's fucking feasting time. But when you decide to play as the Tyranids, or when you decide to look at lore of the Tyranids, besides my videos, just know that when you see the Tyranids fighting, you will see scores upon scores of units massing onto targets at extremely high coordination because they're a hive mind. But you're also going to see it where the moment they take over a city, they don't stop, they don't sleep. They're going to immediately go to the next city because they don't simply sit around and make bases. The only time that they may actually sit around is if they're establishing more digestive pools to break down the planet or break down some material. Like a hive city is pretty tough to break down and digest. It could take a few days. And in the lore in the Codex, as stated, an undefended agriculture world could only be taken about a week, maybe a couple weeks, to digest entirely, the entire planet. So when it comes to more mechanical worlds, they will break that down, digest the buildings, they'll digest everything. After all, hey, there is iron in the human body, so a Tyranid, especially for their weapons, they may need a lot more of those materials that they can't get because they don't do mining, they don't do anything like that. They're hunter-gatherers to the extreme. They're all about survival, they're all about taking over and then running away while it replenishes, so that way they can come back a million years later and take it over again. This seems to be the way the Tyranids love to work, and it's really fascinating to stare at up close. Now, when it comes to Tyranid armies, the way they function, they do rely on synapse units. Synapse units are units that are essentially brains, but they function kind of like officers. They don't give commands or anything like that, but they just simply exist to make sure that the army stays coherent, the army stays coordinated. And this is where you see the Tyranids do have a weakness, is that their hive mind may be an awesome psychical thing, which is great. It's great to have a one big mega mind. But the issue is that when it comes to the forces on the ground and the forces in space, they need some sort of cohesion. It's very difficult for you to command your body when your body is scattered throughout the universe. This is where synapse units come into play. They augment, they enhance the sound and resonance of the hive mind's commands. This is why if you kill synapse units, Tyranids will revert to just feral monstrosities where they'll just start butchering each other, butchering the enemy. They'll just whack each other with their weapons for no reason. They're becoming animals again. And this is where the Tyranids are actually pretty interesting, is that despite having this weakness where they require synapses, it's not necessarily that bad of an ordeal, because if they put another synapse unit there, they could just simply kill the feral Tyranids, redigest them for absolutely zero biomass lost, and then continue their way. So that's why I like Tyranids a lot. It's like, oh wow, my units are rebelling me? Let's just redigest them and then just spit them back out again. I love that a lot about Tyranids. So besides that, this has been Tyranids. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned a bit about them. I love the idea of hunter-gatherers that just exist in the galaxy on the extreme far side of it. Because after all, when you look at humans and the way we exist as hunter-gatherers, we can desolate a place pretty good. I mean, look at bison. Bison in America were fucking nearly annihilated from just a bunch of people grabbing their guns and just laying waste to the bisons. Now imagine that on a much greater scale. And it's just simply this tribe of aliens who they just go around the galaxy, collect what they need, and then go on to get more so that way they can thrive. Because they're not like Native Americans, or I would say some tribes down in South Africa or South America where they're just eating just to stay alive. No, they're eating to thrive. So in order to thrive, you have to have a surplus. If you're eating to live, you don't need a surplus. So that's the way I liken to think of the Tyranids. They're not there to catch one fish at the river. They're here to catch all the fish in the lake. Hell yeah. Besides that, has been Free to 700. I'm out. See you guys next time.